Well, I think personally that anybody connected with drugs today should be put away for a long time because they're the ruination of the country.
I've got no idea about it. I don't approve of it, that's all.
I've read the marijuana, LSD.
I'm for bringing back the birch. And for stronger things, a taste of the cat and nine tails.
Why do they need this stuff? We never used to need when we was young. I used to have a good time. The only drug I ever used to take was that.
Stupid. That's my honest opinion. You can live without drugs, same as anybody else do.
There are 8 sellers like this in the country. On these shelves are 12 million used prescriptions. Pricing them is a full-time job for 80 girls. It works out that every man, woman and child averages over £3 worth of drugs each year. It costs the country 160 million. The figures move round and round, but what they add to is the multi-drug society. Us. We have a very large drug problem all around us, and yet the drug problem, those words, mean something quite different. They mean the junkie, the needle, addiction. Dependence, on the other hand, is something much more friendly. Mrs. Birchett has 2 Barbiturates sleeping pills each night. It's not the needle, nor against the law, but just how different is it? First, of course, they've been prescribed. In Mrs. Birchett's case, 9 years ago.
Well, I lost my husband very suddenly. He just got out of bed and dropped down and found him dead 9 years ago. And I just couldn't sleep. This went on for some time, and then I mentioned it to the doctor. And of course he put me on the tablets. And I find they're a great help because I have no ill effect from them. They just get me off to sleep.
From the point of view of weight of sheer numbers, probably the most widely abused drug is the barbiturate group.
Dr. Willis runs a drug treatment centre in London.
My personal guess would be that there were very many people taking not such huge doses, but nevertheless they'd become psychologically dependent on that substance.
Oh no, I don't think anything at all like that. I just think they're doing me a lot of good, letting me get my rest. If they were addictive, I should want to take more and more, I should think. I do try at times and not take them. Well, then I have a couple of nights where I just don't sleep.
People who are in this situation of being dependent on barbiturates wouldn't really acknowledge their state to be one of addiction, because most people tend to equate addiction with the sort of middle-class stereotype of the long-haired, indolent youngster. As a colleague of mine put it, I'm dependent, you're addicted. I think the thing is that naturally the person who's injecting himself, getting very ill with heroin, This is a very dramatic sight, and it commands a lot of our attention. But it doesn't make somebody who's regularly taking barbiturates and can't stop taking them any the less dependent on them.
I mean, it gets you off to sleep. It doesn't actually drug you, but it just gets you off in a very quiet way.
3 on 796. 1 on 804. 2 on 805.
Does it matter that we're dependent on our sleeping pills? Well, it depends how dependent we are. These two are checking sleep patterns, and changes in the way you sleep are probably the finest measure of a drug's withdrawal symptoms. The clues that let you check the pattern are called rapid eye movements. At the moment, she's dreaming. If she wasn't, her eyes would be still. This research is being done by the Department of Psychiatry in Edinburgh University. It's directed by Dr. Ian Oswald.
Well, the key thing that our measurements can tell us about is the length of time it takes the brain to get back to normal after someone's stopped taking drugs.
Say you take a barbiturate for a while. Well, the first thing it does is to reduce the dreaming part of your sleep. As you go on with it, dreaming slowly creeps back to normal. But what happens when you stop the pills? Dr. Oswald.
And if we look at this graph here, when the drug stops, there's what we call a rebound, and it takes about 2 months to get back to normal.
And for that 2 months, you'll be dreaming more. It's a physical as opposed to a psychological withdrawal effect. This distinction between physical and psychological used to be taken as the dividing line between hard and soft drugs. It's not a distinction that Dr. Oswald now makes.
I think these delicate techniques that we have used have demonstrated to me at least the naivety of the old distinction between psychological dependence and physical dependence.
The disturbances are showing up in all sorts of drugs that were thought of as soft. Apart from the barbiturates, it's there with amphetamines and some of the minor tranquilizers. And then there's another problem. What sort of state are you in on the morning after a barbiturate sleep?
Now this is what I want you to do. You sit quietly in the chair and you'll hear a series of clicks coming from the loudspeaker here behind you. As soon as you hear the click, respond by pressing the key as quickly as you can. We shall be measuring how quickly you can do it, and we'll be starting now.
Research at the Maudsley Hospital in London has produced some very worrying results. Your reactions are significantly slower. Card sorting is down by 7%. The tests were done on ordinary people 12 hours after they'd taken a normal dose of 1 or 2 sleeping pills. In simply pressing a counter, performance is down by 9%.
These tests are quite simple, and yet they do show definite impairment the following morning, and very often the subject is unaware that performance is impaired. An example of how important this is, of course, is given by the estimate that 1 night's sleep in 10 in this country at the present moment is induced by sleeping tablets. And therefore every morning there are thousands of people driving to work impaired by the sleeping tablets which they have taken the night before. You see, people expect drugs to put them to sleep quickly and efficiently, to work till 7 o'clock the following morning, and then they expect to wake up and be perfectly fresh for the rest of the day. And this is just impossible.
No, I don't find anything like that at all. I don't find myself any different, really.
Despite her disbelief, Mrs. Birchett's little helpers obviously have their snags. There is one more. If you withdraw suddenly from heavy doses, doctor-prescribed doses taken by mouth, you can have seizures and actually die. This rat has come off heavy barbiturate injections. Now its supersensitive nervous system has gone berserk. Quite clearly, we can't shelter behind the word dependence. Barbiturates are addictive. To prescribe them freely is a habit some doctors deplore.
I would say that all doctors who prescribe barbiturates without thought must have the deaths of a number of teenagers on their consciences. Furthermore, it supplies an easy and an attractive method of suicide to people who are bent upon it. They may find other means, it is true, but it is none of our business as doctors to provide such easy means. And I think they're dangerous.
Just about all the junkies that I know take sleepers.
Sleepers is just the junkie's name for barbiturates. They inject them through a needle.
They discovered that if you take a sleeper before a fix, you feel the fix more, and also you can make do with a bit less heroin. They take barbiturates during the day, inject them to sort of knock themselves out when they haven't got enough heroin to stay awake and enjoy themselves.
To inject sleepers is to push a whole lot of solid material into your veins. It irritates, causes sores, and sometimes gangrene and amputation. They simply weren't designed to be injected. Then going with it is the life. Stephen and his wife Marcia neglect their normal physical needs like food and warmth. Ultimately, it's this way of life and the lack of attention to needle damage that usually cause the final catastrophe, death. It's not just heroin they use, it's their favorite, but junkies don't stick to one drug. We asked Stephen what was the total score of drugs that he'd fixed through a needle into his body.
Barbiturates, amphetamines, heroin, cocaine, acid. What other classes of drug are there?
No drug is entirely safe, yet we can't arbitrarily condemn all the mood-changing drugs. They fall into 5 main groups, and what's important is to understand their relative dangers. The first group, the narcotics, are drugs like opium, heroin and morphine, which make you hazy and euphoric, insulated from the world. Apart from being sleeping pills, the barbiturates are general sedatives or depressant drugs. They are the down drugs. The third group have exactly the opposite effect. They are the up drugs. Pep pills like amphetamines together with cocaine. Then, and in this case not from chemist shops, come the drugs that make you hallucinate, the psychedelics, LSD, mescaline and so on. Lastly come all the various forms of marijuana from the cannabis plant. We'll come back to that later, but as a starting point for comparison, we'll take the narcotics. The raw material for narcotics is the opium poppy. Its harvest is a big and largely legal business. From the London School of Pharmacy, Professor Fairbairn.
We start with the poppy while it's still green, and out in Turkey where I was last summer, the workers, when the poppy is just right, they scrape it with this instrument which has got 7 teeth here and makes this mark round here. And during the afternoon the juice, white milky juice, flows out, and next morning it's quite hard and brown. And then they come along either with a scraper like this or with a knife like this and scrape it into this container which they hang round here. And at the end of the day they've probably produced a small bowl of this brown dry juice. And this is the raw opium. This used to be wrapped up in poppy leaf. Nowadays I'm afraid they just drop it in the soil and dust it with dirty soil so it's dry. And for many, many centuries, thousands of years, people have just taken this brown material and put it into a pipe and smoked it. This, of course, is how opium had been used for thousands of years, but about 150 years ago, a German pharmacist isolated morphine. And I think this is where our problems really began to multiply.
Morphine is about 10 times stronger than opium. Heroin is 30 times stronger. The price of black market heroin has risen from £1 to £6 a grain since the law changed to restrict prescriptions. Sale or use of these drugs non-medically is forbidden by the 1965 Dangerous Drugs Act. If you break the law, then you risk a maximum of 10 years in prison and or a fine of £1,000. They're drugs you inject into your muscle or main line into your veins for a faster and more dangerous effect. Dr. James Willis.
In the case of somebody who's never had it before, I suppose one of the most striking subjective effects is that they may often feel very nauseated and may vomit. Effects on, one gets a depressant effect on pulse rate and breathing rate.
The first thing that happens when somebody sticks a needle in their arm is physical rejection. They throw up. Yeah? This is what in actual fact happens. There does everything it can to combat this poison. So this isn't a high. This is a miserable, bloody state to be in. It might be a relief from pain, but that isn't to say that it's something way up there, because it isn't. If you take a normal line like that, and somebody who's likely to become an addict is down here, all that happens is that there's an in-between the normal line and where they're at. It isn't a high in those terms. Do you follow what I mean? And I'm really serious about this word high, because it implies pleasure. And if you examine it, man, there is nothing pleasurable about a bloody junkie. Nothing.
See, before I ever took drugs, I used to suffer with my chest anyway.
I know. I had asthma.
I had asthma, yeah,
right.
from the age of 13 till I was about 15.
From the National Health Service, Jeanette draws a daily prescription of heroin. One wonders if it's her background or personality or what that drives her to damage herself and her family in this way.
I think when both these children were born, you were using heroin at the time.
Yes.
And both the babies had sort of withdrawal sickness at birth, I think, and had to be...
No, I think just Louise,
just one.
The second child did.
Yeah.
Children of junkies are often addicted at birth and have to be weaned off it, withdrawn, in the first few days of life.
Where does your father come into all this? I can't...
Well, I've never seen my father.
Yes. He just faded away early.
Well, my mother said that he left when I was 6 weeks old, and they got divorced, and I've never seen him.
What happened after that? You weren't brought up at home, were you?
I was brought up in an orphanage.
Here we have somebody who has almost fortuitously slipped into the realms of drug usage. No doubt, taking drugs meets some sort of a real need within herself, diminishing anxiety and despair.
Actually, I thought everybody lived in convents.
Did you?
Yeah, that's what I was brought up to believe, you know.
Yes.
And when I was 15, they said, you know, I was old enough now to go to work. And that's when all the trouble started.
There seem to be two ways in which people use narcotics. Some, like Stephen and Marcia, started simply to share the experiences of their addicted friends. Others use them as painkillers to blot out a world that's breaking up so unpleasantly that it would have driven most of us to put our heads in a gas oven.
She went up and told him, and since then he hasn't wrote to me, you know.
Which prison is he in, actually?
Wandsworth.
In Wandsworth, is he? And this is, what was it, an 18-month, 2-year sentence?
He got 2 years,
2 years. Yes.
Is it just background? Is it a case of there but for the grace of God go I? Or is it personality? People have tried to define the addictive personality. A consultant psychiatrist from the Maudsley Hospital.
There's no such person as the addictive personality. Sometimes people will say all addicts are passive. Somebody else will say all addicts are aggressive. The answer is that here, in discussing addiction, there's nothing more blinkering than thinking in terms of a stereotype.
I suppose I got really hooked on it about 6 months after I started using it. In other words, I was using it every day. And I was using it more and more every day.
Perhaps the most important things about the addictive drugs are that they resist withdrawal and that the dose goes up.
I started off with half a pill, which is a 1/12 of a grain, I ended up using anything up to 25, 30 pills in a fix. That's roughly 5 grains, I suppose, 4, 5 grains. No, 6, up to 7 grains. I've actually took on one occasion, I actually took 60 pills at once. That was later on. Getting off the point.
The point is that as a drug chemically alters the balance of your body, so your body tries to correct the balance back. To get the same effect, the dose must rise to overcome this tolerance. Strangely, none of the drug users we talked to accepted this mechanistic, automatic property of the drug. The simplest way to convince them might have been with laboratory mice. Half these animals have had no drugs. The other half have been on heroin for 4 days. They started on a small dose, but to get the same effect, this had to be increased 8-fold by the end of the week. Now all the mice, addicted and naive, are going to get the initial small dose. If tolerance has developed, then the drug should have less effect on the old hands than on the mice that are having their first injection. It's the anesthetic pain-killing effect we're looking for. Does the mouse notice the little clip that's squeezing its tail? That was a mouse on its first fix. The drug was having a pain-killing effect. Now one of the addicted mice on exactly the same dose. Quite obviously, the heroin has lost its effect, and this has happened in only 4 days. What you're seeing here is the total effect on the whole mouse. If we knew enough about its actual causes, then maybe we could help the junkie. This much we know, that the drug acts at the junctions between one nerve and another. The professor of pharmacology in Oxford is Professor Peyton.
Well, this needs one has to start explaining how cells connect with each other, operationally, so to speak. That one cell fires off the next, in practically every case, we believe, by releasing a little bit of chemical at a nerve ending which activates the next cell. Yeah. Let me try and draw it. And first of all, here's a nerve ending, and here's the cell it's coming in contact with, near contact. And here's a region of the cell surface which responds to it.
For signals to pass, something must cross the gap, and it's in this gap that all the addictive drugs seem to operate. In the normal way of things, in the transmitting cell, upstream of the gap, there's a build-up of a substance that will act as a chemical messenger. It's called a transmitter substance. Normally, it leaks across the gap to pass the nerve signal on.
The drug fundamentally stops, puts a block, we don't know how, quite, stopping the transmitter escaping from the nerve ending. Now, what will happen? You're damming it back there, and now it'll begin to accumulate, and even though you're restraining the rate of escape, it'll now begin to break through, and you'll get as much coming out as you had originally. Now this would be a perfectly good means for generating tolerance.
It's just bloody agony, that's all. You just can't. I did it once in a hotel room in Paris for 4 days. I was delirious all the time.
In this case, it's not an effect of tolerance, but of the other automatic property of these drugs, the withdrawal effects, going cold turkey. It's what happens when you suddenly stop your drug.
After 4 days, on the 5th day, I woke up and realized that it was sort of more or less over. I'd spent 3 days, the whole 4 days, wearing just a pair of underpants with both my legs through one hole, one leg of the underpants. From ankle to shoulder, both down both arms, I was one red raw scab from writhing on the bed. And I had to have it 3 times bigger within 3 days than I'd ever had before. You just don't put yourself through that sort of agony willingly, knowingly.
It's a condition we can't alleviate much because we don't really understand it. There are at least two rival theories. The first says that as a drug is stopped, the barrier is removed and outpours all the trace substance. Or withdrawal could come from the receptor cell. Starved of signals, it tries to correct this by becoming more sensitive. Suddenly its normal flow of stimulus reappears, only to hit a supersensitive cell. The massive responses are withdrawal pains. Avoiding them is clearly part of addiction, and to understand addiction is the real problem. This mainlining rat has a catheter, a tube, leading directly into its heart. When it presses the bar, provided it presses it often enough, heroin is shot straight into its heart. With no training and no previous experience of the drug, the rat discovers the effects for itself. Within days, it will press the bar up to 80 times for each shot. It may press the bar nearly 1,000 times in 24 hours. It's a crude laboratory model of the junkie's restricted world.
The animal model isn't the whole explanation, but I think that it's very promising looking at this idea that with, for instance, heroin, you suffer withdrawal symptoms, and that's punishment. You take another shot of heroin, which relieves these very unpleasant withdrawal symptoms, that's reward. And in this way, the drug builds up in us a strong conditioned reflex which will make us want to go on taking heroin.
The need has become so strong for these morphine-addicted monkeys that they queue for their injections. But the drug apart, incredibly it seems, the needle itself is in a way addictive in its own right. Dr. Willis.
In the case of self-injectors, they become very involved with the process of self-injection itself. This becomes a very important part of their whole life, the ritual, and no doubt the symbolism that goes into it of self-injection. These are very key experiences.
You know, I can think of a case in mind where a guy was having, for 2 weeks, he was having water every 2 hours.
I think the needle was more important to me than any of the drugs I actually used to put into myself. It was the whole routine of being able to change my own mood according to my own will whenever I wanted to. Nobody could say, don't do that now. Nobody had control over what I did to my body, you know, just sticking it in. What it was in the syringe was to a certain extent immaterial.
I think it's important that if the patient is going to inject themselves, clearly that they should be injecting themselves with something which is relatively safe. And this is why one would prefer them to inject methadone than inject heroin. But you can't compel people to do this. In any case, I don't think it would be justified. After all, it isn't as if the treatment of heroin-dependent people was particularly successful. I tend to see the whole thing really as the care of the chronic sick, the care of somebody who has a long-term disorder, and try and support them through from crisis to crisis with or without drugs. But in a sense, unless I feel it's very necessary, let them find their own level. But that's a personal viewpoint, it's not shared by everyone.
London's Soho, especially Piccadilly, is the traditional centre for needle drugs. Black market Chinese heroin is reputedly sold via the Chinese of Gerrard Street. But needle drugs apart, it's also the home of other pills and potions. These three are very senior speed freaks, addicts of amphetamines, pep pills.
It makes one move a lot faster. I like to go to places and talk to people when I've taken it. You don't feel so withdrawn, perhaps.
Amphetamines came in before the last war, first as pep pills, now also as slimming pills.
When you're speeding yourself with a lot of other people, you realise how irrelevant the speech is. You know, you tend to sort of promise lots of things which you have no intention of doing anyway.
It's mainly a means of enhancing whatever you feel like doing. It gives you the extra energy.
They're the pills of chatter, noise, incessant conversation. Rapping, they call it. It's the chemical of speed. Dr. James Willis.
When people take amphetamines, if one likes to say the amphetamine user, he'll do so because he wants to experience the euphoria, the elevation of mood that goes with that drug. One will find a raise in pulse rate, a rise in blood pressure. He'll usually be physically very restless, with a very dry mouth. Often he gets a tendency to tear at his fingers and skin and pick around his mouth.
We tend to think that that sort of drug effect depends only on the chemical of the drug. These 16 mice are free to roam the cage. This second 16 is no more or less crowded. Overall, the cages are the same size, but they're in private stalls. They can see, hear and smell each other, but can't touch each other like their brothers. Each mouse in both cages is getting exactly the same dose of amphetamine in exactly the same way. And the question is, will the drug have the same effect in the two situations? 40 minutes later, this lot in their individual stalls are moving a little faster, grooming themselves a bit more, but are relatively undisturbed by a tap on the cage. The effects of amphetamines, and this goes for most of the drugs we're talking about, including alcohol, depend not just on the drug, but also on the whole situation, the place, the mood, and the person himself. For example, Big John gets exactly the opposite of the traditional speedy effect.
With me, I've gone completely into myself. I don't want to mix. I don't want to go out. I just want to be there and enjoy what I call my speed buzz.
Really the major one of the most important of amphetamines is that they can induce transient psychotic states where the person is out of contact with reality, very excited, maybe hearing things, feels that he's being persecuted, and for want of a better word, really goes mad for a few days.
Shut your eyes to go to sleep and sort of pictures start forming in your mind. All of a sudden the picture starts speeding up and you seem to be going into them. It just happens in seconds, or that makes it seem like hours. And your body's completely locked, you can't move a muscle, you can't blink an eyelid. If your eyes are open, they stay open. If they're shut, they stay shut. It's like a conscious dream. And it's pretty frightening because you get these thoughts that you're not going to come out of it.
A drug-induced minor madness. Most drug users know the dangers, but like smokers, they go on. Big John has been taking pills for 14 years.
I reached a point some years ago where I wasn't able to hold a conversation with anyone. I was just a vegetable.
Laboratory animals become vegetable, but in a strange way. These mindless, repetitive movements are the results of very high doses of pep pills. A human equivalent, the student who revises with the help of pep pills and then finds he's filled his exam paper by constantly writing his name. The sleep researchers in Edinburgh have checked amphetamines too. Although it's long been accepted that they're psychologically addictive, they've always been regarded as having no withdrawal symptoms. It just isn't so. Like heroin, morphine, barbiturates and so on, there are brain changes that alter dreaming. Now, as a result of tests like this, amphetamines are at last going out again. Since 1969, Ipswich has been amphetamine-free, but so far other towns are only slowly heading towards this sort of voluntary ban. Our approach is piecemeal, but in Ireland these are illegal pills, banned by law, and pill-taking amongst entrants to remand homes has dropped by 98%. Why, one wonders, does this country not follow the obviously effective Irish example? For so far, Big John has no problems.
It seems to be a lot easier now than what it was some 3 years ago. There was a glut 8 years ago, but then there was a falling off up until, say, a year ago, and it's building up again.
Of all the drugs that make you hallucinate, the commonest and most powerful is LSD. A trip can be induced by as little as 1/10,000th of a gram. LSD used to be taken on a sugar lump or blotting paper. Now it's pills. Pills with names like Florida Ray drops and Californian sunshine.
It intensifies things. It intensifies just about everything. I can concentrate, let's say, on that microphone. Possibly if I was stripping, I would like to go through that wire mesh and into the wires and break them up and find out what was inside it until I fully understood what that microphone was all about.
Normally, as one talks, about 90%, say, of one's attention is diverted onto outside things, onto the person one's talking to, and so on, and about 10% flickers back into one's interior to monitor one's feelings and to concentrate on the kind of thoughts and sensations that are giving rise to one's conduct at any time. Now, LSD seems to me rather to reverse that proportion, and what one doesn't...
So it's a drug of introspection, according to Dr. Mallison, a psychiatrist who's used it in medical treatment. In a way, it's heightening perception, but in a totally unbalanced, unstructured way. The most widely known result of this imbalance is the I can fly feeling. Tragic accidents have happened and will happen again, but what we need to know is how frequently, what's the risk attached to each trip. As we have no idea how much illegal acid is used, the only clues come from the legal use of LSD in psychiatric treatments. If these pills represent every time legal acid was given since 1955, then these are the accidents. It works out crudely at a 10,000 to 1 chance.
I would have thought the psychological disturbances and the possibility of low-grade psychosis, which doesn't, of course, show up in a sort of reportable newspaper story sense, is a much realer danger than the dramatic accident and the chap who tries to fly from church towers.
It's going too fast. You know, I can't hold the telephone.
The telephone is absolutely solid. What you're talking about is you're just imagining it.
But it's going fast. It's going so fast. I can't hold it anymore.
You're only imagining at the moment that you can't hold it.
To Dr. Mallison, it's a low-grade psychosis. To the acid head, it's a bad trip. Rufus Harris is part of Release, a group in London who, among other services, man a phone day and night. One of their more frequent jobs is to talk somebody down.
I knew I was going to explode, and I went to the kitchen and I had to splash water on myself. I knew I had to cool myself down, to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't slow down.
Now, do you remember what it was like earlier today?
Before?
The general idea is to try to convince them that what is happening is only temporary, that it's not real, but in the mind.
Nothing.
Then you try to move their thoughts on to more friendly, pleasant things.
The room's like the carpet. It's all. I can't seem to hold.
Yes, you can slow down. You can slow down that easily. In fact, you're slowing down now.
Yes.
You're slowing down.
Slowing down.
Yeah.
That representation was one sort of bad trip, the sort that lasts only as long as the drug. It's nasty enough, but there's a longer, more serious version that may end up needing hospital treatment, a psychosis that stays behind when the drug is gone. But acid has to face other charges, more emotionally loaded charges. Charges of teratogenicity, deformed fetuses, crippled children, and broken chromosomes. Chromosome damage does happen in laboratory animals, but not more than on aspirin or caffeine, says one study. There is just one case of a malformed child in the medical literature, but certainly there's been no flood from California, the home of acid. All in all, despite the many scientific papers, quite a number of experts would now accept a non-proven verdict. Not safe, but just don't know.
It seems to me regrettable that such a fuss has been made about the chromosome thing, because as research has really ceased to confirm that the risks are real and serious, of course young people, to them it's another case of crying wolf. You know, the adults always lie. And consequently the very real warnings about the psychiatric dangers of taking LSD, of having accidents when confused under its influence, of having an acute psychosis, are disregarded.
Cannabis sativa, a weed that grows over large parts of both hemispheres. From it we get marijuana, pot, weed, hashish, hemp. Call it what you will, it's all the same thing. To a certain extent, it's junior LSD. High doses sometimes produce hallucinations rather like the effects of acid.
What's that?
Double flame.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good.
Well, that's the thing that going to smoke.
Oh, yes.
The magic cigar.
The magic cigar.
Cannabis is the odd drug out in this program. All the others are misused medical drugs. Pot has little medical use. And then it's not so much a chemical like the others, but a vegetable mixture. What's more, there are no signs of tolerance. In fact, rather than the dose going up, experienced users get the same effect with less.
Being stoned starts off by being a very strong feeling of release, relaxation. Tension drains away. It's replaced by a very mild, strong feeling of contentment and pleasure. It tends to knock me back and make me very introspective and reflective. It certainly releases certain things in my mind which make my thought much more creative. On the other hand, thinking at such times is much more interesting than actually putting it down, which is a very laborious job.
Where did he go to? I think that's for me.
In fact, if you have an exploding joint with a flag that comes out as they explode, then a flag comes out which says don't get uptight.
You can eat the drug in the form of hash cookies, but generally you smoke it, either using hash, that's the concentrated form, and ordinary tobacco, or rolling the joint with just the dried leaves. They're called grass.
Well, first of all, I must apologise for these rather feeble specimens, but
Professor Fairbairn from the London School of Pharmacy.
one starts with the female part of the plant, about this part here, where the active resin is, and this is chopped down, and this is some we actually have harvested this summer. And when it's dried in the sun, the leaves fall off and the tops fall off, and there is your marijuana. Sometimes there is a sample from South Africa, similar material. Sometimes it's compressed by treading on it to produce a block like this, known as bang. But a much more economical method of transporting it is to scrape off the resin here. This is done by beating the tops onto sacking and then scraping the sticky resin from the sacking and compressing that into these cells. Now this is a rather old specimen, doesn't smell very much, but here are some fresh recent seizures, and these have got the authentic smell, and as you can see they're very easy to smuggle. These are very much more concentrated than this material, perhaps 10 or 20 times.
The problem with cannabis research is that it's a dreadful chemical mixture. These are the structures of the hundreds of ingredients. At least 5 of them affect mood, but one, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is responsible for about 75% of pot's effects. This is quite a new discovery and has led to a surge in research work. Using pure THC, experiments like this have begun to mean something because they can be repeated. When we filmed this, it was the first time the experiment had been done. The idea is to test mood-altering drugs in a situation where mood has an effect. To test THC on individual rats to find the lethal dose is fine, but doesn't really tell you much about the drug. A small baboon colony has a very rigid social structure, and Dr. Peter Berry, by pulling threatening faces and getting not a yawn but a show of armament in return, can measure the state of the colony's mood. Once he's made these baseline control measurements, if he then gives the senior baboon, Boss is his name, a carrot spiked with a weighed quantity of THC, we can watch the drug's effects on the mood of the whole colony. Left alone, they react to Boss. Scoring goes on as it happens, but so that the results can be checked, the experiment is videotaped. Then comes the acid test. Dr. Berry must go back into the cage to see how Boss reacts to him and how the drug has changed his mood. Boss scores remarkably low for aggression. The drug turns out to be a sort of anxiety suppressor. Boss is in no way sedated, but no longer regards Dr. Berry as a threat to his position of seniority. Let's look at the human equivalent of Boss's state. Our THC party, for it was THC, not pot they were smoking, is now in its last stages. To compare it with alcohol, this scene is the equivalent of the moments before closing time on a Saturday night. The question to answer in the legalized pot argument is not is it safe. That's important, but what's more important is to know what really widespread pot smoking would do to a Western industrial society like ours. We asked one of the pot smokers.
Truthfully, and I mean this truthfully, you cannot organize a society with people basically who are smoking pot. The main danger is that people begin to be immediately dissatisfied with what they're doing if it's boring and ridiculous and stupid. And as 80% of the people in this country are doing boring, ridiculous and stupid occupations, by necessity, not by choice. Therefore, those people are going to start asking themselves, why the hell am I doing this useless thing, especially if they start realizing it from themselves. But if it comes from themselves, well, then it's something which cannot be cured.
Pot smoking is, at least in some circles in London, the norm. As it spreads, it becomes more and more important to check the truth or not of the statement that pot leads to the hard stuff.
I don't accept this statement. If this were the case, we should have more heroin users than we have. Also, one would expect a much larger number of heroin users in this country who come from countries where cannabis is habitually used.
In that we don't have any knowledge as to the total population of people using cannabis, any calculation as to the escalation is inevitably, to some extent, guesswork.
Dr. Hawkes from the Maudsley. Even if pot proves not to lead to the hard stuff, like LSD, it's charged with deforming babies. Professor Vincent de Paul Lynch.
We started out to perform a series of experiments to determine whether or not marijuana or its products had such effects on fetuses. But beyond that, we were concerned what might happen in subsequent generations.
In previous work, the drug was injected. Here, more like the real world, they breathe it in as smoke. They smoke for 3 minutes a day in the critical period of pregnancy when the baby's organs form.
We know that if there is any teratologic defect to be produced, it will be produced during that period. But incidentally, again, any chemical substance, depending upon its potency and upon its dose, will produce these defects. We anticipate this.
Once the mother passed the critical period, she had no more drug and continued pregnancy normally. Her young, undrugged, were allowed to breed in their turn.
Well, in the second generation, it's a rather odd defect. We call it micrognathy. It refers to a condition in which there is a shortening of the lower mandible, a deformation of the tongue, and an incomplete formation of the roof of the mouth.
Professor Lynch wasn't expecting quite such major deformities, and neither really was anybody else. He made it quite clear to us that his results are preliminary. They need confirming, and he's not willing to extend them to humans. But it is a black mark against pot.
So despite the fact that the law about cannabis is widely broken, I think as a pharmacologist, one just cannot agree to it being approved for general use. It doesn't pass the tests.
If it was just a matter, of course, of saying we shall or shan't add another drug, no one in their senses would say let's add another drug. But just like that, the drug is cannabis exists.
And the fact is, too, we cannot blind ourselves to the quite definite expectation that the numbers of mind-altering drugs which can be used beneficially or may be used casually can only go on increasing. And it is up to a mature and responsible society to come to terms with that.
I think society quite hypocritical in its treatment of drugs. It tolerates drugs, the widespread use of drugs, which have undoubted damaging effects. It defines as illegal a drug which I think most people would agree in moderate use has not the same damaging consequences.
It's a case of putting cannabis into its correct perspective. But the same goes for the needle drugs. The damage they do to the individual is frightening, so we exaggerate in our minds their total effect. But in the cold statistical terms of the Home Office, the number of deaths they cause is tiny. Mr. Jeffries.
The 1969 figures, for example, show that during that year, a total of 64 of our known addicts died, a good many of them from natural causes, not from an overdose, which is small when you compare it with the number of deaths from road accidents as a result of alcohol misuse.
64 deaths in a year, about what we've killed on the roads since last Friday. Alcohol kills 30 times more people than heroin. Tobacco kills 1,000 times more. There does seem to be a hypocrisy, an inconsistency in our society if we regard drug abusers as being quite unlike us.
People seem to have very strongly held views and opinions, either along the line, all drugs are evil, or all drugs are good, both of which are equally absurd. I think unless we try...
Barbiturates, without thought, must have the deaths of a number of teenagers on their consciences.
One night's sleep in 10 is induced by sleeping tablets.
As a colleague of mine put it, I'm dependent, you're addicted.